Episode 6. Pursued. Smoke hung in the tunnel. The fire, the source of the light Casey and Comos were following, was ebbing more and more, but the smoke and the acrid smell of burnt flesh lay over them. Ahead were sounds and a dull light. Casey's senses and thoughts were running wild, his body like a clenched muscle held taut, waiting every second for a fight. With every step toward the noise and the light, he felt as if he were walking toward some vast, immovable thing that would swallow him. He shook his head, screwed his eyes shut, and blinked away the sting the smoke put in them. Comos led on, unswayed. Casey wondered whether Comos even registered the smoke as a strain, or whether it was only him who was so soft. After a few minutes, they came out into a kind of cave, a cavern. Shadows danced on the ceiling, thrown by the fire still burning in the distance, lending the whole hollow an eerie air. The stench was brutal, but that was not what troubled Casey. It was the facility, the enormous depot, the complex, he counted at least 12 rail lines down here, the armored gate they'd passed. All of it. That was the real problem. Someone had sunk a fortune into building a secret, gigantic infrastructure, and they hadn't known. The Mglari hadn't known. That was a problem, because knowing was, among other things, their job. Reaching this level of secrecy was no simple work of rival gangs. This was something else, something far larger. They crept into the complex under cover of the cars, heading for a factory building that had plainly been spared by the flames. Comos paused in a crouch and drew his mask from the holster on the back of his leg. He signaled Casey to do the same. Casey pulled the mask over his head, activated it with a tap against the mouthpiece, and at once felt the crystal-clear oxygen sweep away every foul smell. The visor came on. Through the digital field of view, he saw Comos, complete with his heart rhythm indicator, and with a second tap, he activated the comm. His mask flagged Comos's connection, and a second later, he heard him too. "All right, start recording," Comos said. Casey did the same. "I count 14 lines," Comos said. Casey activated a sensor in his mask and let his gaze sweep between the two visible ends of the hollow. Then he looked up and read the numbers off his hollow. "About 900 meters across and 160 high," he said. Comos said nothing. The shouting in the distance grew louder. Someone was bellowing orders, at least it sounded that way. Comos nodded toward the sound, and they crept off. They crawled under the cars, closer to the noise. His mask fed him all manner of information: the count of cars, the CO2 level, the temperature, thermal signatures on the ground where Comos had gone before him. Before the last row of cars, he noticed an orange marker at the edge of his mask. He looked. On the loading platform, there were orange residues of organic matter on the ground. They ended right at the platform's edge, by the cars. Casey said nothing and crept to the marker. He looked around carefully, but no one was in sight. Comos crouched beside him, his gaze following the residue to the cars. They looked at each other in silence. Then Comos climbed to the end of the next car and hauled himself up. At the end of each car was a maintenance hatch, and he looked through it. Then he turned to the car behind and looked through that one too. His gaze held there a few seconds longer. Then he dropped down and looked at Casey. "What?" Casey asked. Comos drew his blaster and checked the charge out of habit. "See for yourself," he said dryly. Casey did as told. The first car was empty, though his mask's organic residue sensor was going wild. The interior glowed almost orange. He couldn't explain it, and was about to ask Comos what he meant. Then, mid-thought, he looked through the hatch of the car behind, and his question was answered. Casey's breath caught. The car, apparently not yet unloaded, was full of bodies. Casey dropped down. His gaze ran down the column of cars. With every car he counted, his mind multiplied the scale of what he was trying to grasp. He took a step back, more from horror than by choice. Komos pulled him into cover at the end of the loading ramp. "Pull yourself together," his protector said. 58 cars on this line. Casey breathed. He did the math, and the horror circled his mind again like a vulture as he remembered all the cars standing on the other lines. "I want the men behind it," Komos said. Casey nodded. He understood. Whoever was responsible would die, that much was certain. But an interrogation, the connections, the motives, mattered far more now than the raw urge to kill the bastards who did this. Casey paused. He wondered what the purpose of all these bodies was. The Imperial crematoria existed for a reason. There was no logical explanation for storing them down here. The shouting grew louder, and both of them whipped their heads around as they heard the whine of a speeder's engines in the distance. A second was approaching. The two Mglari looked at each other and crept under the cars, line by line, toward the sounds. The speeder that had just arrived set down not far from another on a huge open floor, rubble on one side, and on the other, an empty space meant for containers. At the thought of the containers, Casey narrowed his eyes and swallowed the anger rising in his gut. He and Komos found a good position from which he could see both speeders and the men. The engines guttered out, and with a hiss, the boarding hatch opened. It faced the tracks, and now they could see who stepped out. "Well, look at that," Komos said. Casey's mask caught the man's face and spat out the information at once. Count Groven Frey, Planetary Administration, Kievian Prime. A man flanked by a woman and an older man came to meet him. "I was here the man began, but the Count simply walked past him and stared at the enormous factory still burning in the background. In disbelief, he ran a hand through his hair and shouted, "Fuck! Fuck! Fuck! Shit!" The men and the woman joined the Count and said nothing. The Count paced, and there was something nervous, frightened in his stride. The man took a step forward. "There's something else," he said, hesitant. The Count turned to him. "The last shipment was hit. The opiate and the weapons were stolen. 3 cars," the man said. Casey saw the Count's eyes go wide. "Oh, shit," he said. He turned and pointed at the factory and the rubble. "This is no accident. None of this is an accident. 15 years, nothing happens, and today, with the last shipment, we get robbed and the factory destroyed," the Count bellowed. "We've set everything in motion. We are fucked if the low reach doesn't rise. I gave them the go only hours ago." Komos and Casey looked at each other. Komos looked to the open speeder ramp that faced them, like an open mouth. "Document everything. I'm staying on the Count. We need to know who he's working with. The moment you're out of here, report it." Casey nodded. Komos waited for no answer. Under cover of the loading ramp, he hurried off, crouched, approached the Count's speeder ramp out of sight, and the next moment, he had already slipped aboard. Casey swallowed hard. He realized he was alone now. From here, the weight of the whole operation was on his shoulders. No mistakes would be tolerated. Komos wasn't there to help him. A vast fear crept over him, wound itself around him again, like a great beast that had scented weak prey. Casey felt exposed.
"Who?"
The Count's roar pulled his attention back.
"Tell me, Rendell. Who?"
The man went to the Count and handed him a hollow tablet.
"A young woman,"
Rendell said. The Count stared at the hollow. She blew the methanol chloride silos sky high. The fire jumped to the other silos, then into the factory. The ethanol lines in the refinery caught. The Count threw the hollow back into Rendell's arms and turned away, frustrated. A woman. One damn woman. Alone, he said. Rendell tilted his head. Alone? I don't think so. There were nearly 30 men when we reached the loading depot at Querby. We're hunting them. They won't get far. The Count glared at him. For your sake, I hope so, Elmer, he said. We've shoved men, weapons, and information up your arse for 10 years, and you had one job. Control the damn low reach, the Count bellowed. We do, Rendell said, visibly worked up. Does this look like control to you? The Count screamed. Rendell said nothing. The Count looked at the woman beside Rendell. This was no accident, he said, and fixed his eyes on the young woman, who exchanged questioning glances with the older man beside her. Today I also caught a spy among my servants, he said, thoughtful. He turned on his heel and hurried to his speeder. Find the woman and my opiate, he shouted, climbed in, and a minute later he was gone through the tunnel. Casey kept his eyes on the three of them. What now, boss? The woman asked. Rendell turned to her. Radio Fullman. If the woman's with that gan, she might head for Querby too, to link up with her crew, and get her picture to every outpost. Anyone who sees her sounds the alarm at once. A man came running up. Boss, we've shut down the ethanol lines. It'll be out soon, he said, panting. Good. Rendell waved him off. The older man spoke up. Boss, if our good Count has made his own boss promises like that, what happens to us if he can't deliver? Rendell looked at him. You think too much, Kamkak, he said. Don't forget who he's been arming for 10 years. We've got almost 2,000 men spread across the low reach. Let him do what he wants, but until then, we do our job. Radio Fullman. Rendell turned away. Casey watched the woman and the man move off toward a transmitter tower at the end of the loading platform to relay Rendell's orders. His thoughts raced. He seized the moment, sprang from cover, and ran to the speeder as silently as he could. He slipped up the ramp and looked around. 4 seats, and in the rear, a conveyor with assorted crates. He crept behind it and hid himself. Safe in his new cover, his mind began to work out a plan. Out of the Burrows, low reach, Querby. From there into the upper low reach, then report. Simple. Then he waited. The minutes passed. His mind gathered all the information. The pattern took shape. A conspiracy. Scale unknown, but a Count tangled up in it. He pictured the consequences and waited. Hope breathed out. She was gasping. After an hour on foot, she caught a water transporter that filled the level cisterns and crept slowly through the low reach. She swung herself onto the back and sat wearily on the thin bumper of the big transporter, one hand clamped to the little service ladder so she wouldn't be thrown off. It was uncomfortable, but a far better option than walking. And besides, it put distance between her and the Burrows exit. And distance was what she needed. The moment she'd found the exit into the low reach, she got her bearings and set out at once for the Querby loading depot. She hoped to catch Zulu and Paz. If not, she'd have to walk back to the breach, and that would take a while. At least she understood now why nobody had known about the facility she had. and she felt a flush of pride at this, so elegantly burned down. The entrance had been laid through an old welding hall at a disused service depot. Elegant, she thought. It had been guarded, but the guards had apparently been watching for something bigger, and she'd simply slipped through a hole in the old concrete wall. What she didn't know, and didn't understand, was how to handle what she'd learned about the refinery. Her stomach turned over again at the memory of the site. The choice of food wasn't large. The Empire's nutrient paste, the rations, the juice, was the only alternative. The only thing there was. Juice. Whatever twisted idiot had thought up the name. It was fitting, she thought. Who she was even supposed to tell was another question. She thought about the consequences of the knowledge, but she couldn't grasp its full scale. So she narrowed her focus to the essentials. She tried to think of an alternative for her family, but she found no logical solution. She set the task aside. First, she had to get back. Then she'd deal with everything else. After a good half hour as a stowaway, she reached one of the low-reach junctions she knew, the ones that led to Quirby. She dropped off, rolled neatly to her feet, and hurried through the filthy, dark side streets toward the loading depot. Some time later, the depot came into sight. With a practiced double jump, she leapt to the wall, pulled herself up, and climbed over. She scanned the tracks for movement, but saw nothing. Then she made out the 3 cars Zulu had, clearly successfully, brought back to the depot. The side gates stood open. She was about to hurry to the cars when a kind of foreboding, a gut feeling, made her stop. She couldn't really put it into words, but some instinct held her back, all but screamed at her not to go. She ducked behind a distribution box between the tracks and peered carefully across. Nothing. The feeling grew and grew, as if an inner voice were driving her legs to move. The pressure to run, to flee, kept building. A kind of panic crept up out of the pit of her stomach. And when the man's voice sounded behind her, her bladder nearly gave out. "Hello, little mouse," said Fullman, rifle raised, perched on top of a car. "Stay right where you are," he grinned.